According to contemporaries, whenever Princess Diana entered a room, everything stopped. But despite the public's love, she lived a difficult life. Every step she took, every word she said, immediately ended up in newspapers and magazines. The media even coined a new term, Diana Mania. She was constantly surrounded by journalists, and this raises a particular question about the relationship between Diana and the media. Sometimes they wrote terrible things about her, but even more often they wrote beautiful things.
A woman who, whilst beautiful, was also flawed, vulnerable, and desperately alone.
Still, they didn't let her live. They formed a ring around her house. Every man she had lunch with somewhere was instantly seen as a potential new lover. He was also followed, photographed, interviewed. Naturally, stories from her servants and secretaries were being bought, and most of them were willing to sell. That didn't help her state of mind either. So that's how she lived, seemingly trapped in the circle of tabloid reporters and paparazzi, all desperate to snap a new photo. On the other hand, it's been noted, and many, including her own relatives, have said that Diana didn't truly hide from journalists. Quite the opposite. When she needed to, she invited them. Charles believed Diana basked in this sea of media attention. She wasn't the only one to think so. So who was Diana, really? A victim of the paparazzi, or a woman who craved attention and, at times, rather clumsily tried to use it to her advantage? Again, there are completely different takes on that. But in any case, in the early 1990s, she decided to make use of one of the journalists. There actually weren't that many journalists at major newspapers who wrote about the royal family. Of course, there could be dozens of photographers, but only a handful of actual reporters. She knew well which ones leaned toward Charles and which ones sympathized with her. Through her friend, James Colthrust, she got in touch with one of those journalists. His name was Andrew Morton, who had written extensively about the royal family, and told him she wanted him to write a book based on her interview. Later, he recalled, that's his vision again, how he listened to her tape for the first time, and we'll discuss the tape later, and also how a completely different Diana was revealed to him, with bulimia, with constant vomiting and binge eating, with depression, with suicide attempts. For the first time, according to him, she learned about the role of Camilla Parker Bowles in Diana's family life. For him, as he wrote, it was a complete shock, even though he was a journalist who covered the social scene. Then she wanted him to write the book, but it had to remain completely secret. He couldn't come to Kensington Palace and record interviews with her, so they came up with a complicated scheme. The sane James Colthrust, who was also a doctor and a friend of Diana's, could easily come over to visit her. He would come by bringing a microphone with him, and they would lock the door. Of course, he came when Charles and the staff weren't around. He brought a list of questions prepared by Andrew Morton, and Morton quickly realized that Diana tended to talk more and feel better in the mornings. By evening, she was anxious and exhausted, so he prepared different questions depending on when Colthrust would be invited. Colthrust would ask the questions, they used tape recorder, and she would bring the recordings to the journalist.
I've confronted my husband about his mistress, and I have been dismissed.
And in this way, many of Diana's stories were recorded. Stories in which, for the first time, she revealed things the entire world now knows. At the time, it was a sensational revelation. She spoke openly about all her awful symptoms.
Suddenly overwhelmed, and I sobbed my eyes out. I ate everything inside.
She shared her vision of the story with Charles. His coldness, his lack of empathy, his affair with Camilla, and much more. She spoke about how poorly the royal family treated her. Morton listened to everything and wrote it down. A lot was done to protect Diana, actually. For example, some of her direct quotes were paraphrased. They tried to hide the fact that she had given an interview. She would write things like, "A friend of Diana's told me," when in reality those were Diana's own words. In other words, he disguised it. So she wrote this very candid book.
I think the intention really was just to try and tell her story so that the world could understand the real Diana.
Then it was decided it would be published. Of course, many newspapers would have jumped at the chance to print it, but she wanted it to be a respectable publication. It was printed in serial format in the Sunday Times. When everything was ready, the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Times went to the owner, the famous media mogul Rupert Murdoch, and said, "We have this book." At the same time, Diana asked her friends to speak with Morton, and he cited them as his sources and was also given access to family photos. So the project had some solid backing, though of course the book is completely subjective and presents Diana's own version of events. Murdoch said, "Of course, I'll support you." He understood perfectly well what the sensation this would be, but he added, "Keep in mind, they'll try to destroy you." And something like that did happen. An enormous scandal broke out. Naturally, everyone read the book. Naturally, Buckingham Palace was absolutely horrified. From the moment on, the idea that they could keep up this polished, glamorous facade began to fall apart. And at that point, there was still no talk of divorce. Neither Diana nor Charles really wanted that yet, and no one wanted the future king's parents to divorce. Charles himself was the future king, and Prince William was next in line. So after the book was published in 1992, it caused a scandal. Naturally, people asked Diana if she had anything to do with it. She said, "I've never even met Mr. Morton," which was true. She never gave him a direct interview. Her sister's husband, Robert Fallows, who held an important position at court, asked Diana several times whether she had any connection to this book. He was a very principled and honest man. She told him no. He reported it up the chain of command, and when it eventually became clear that she had been involved, it seriously damaged her relationship with her sister. Still, Diana kept pretending she had nothing to do with it. "I don't know where that came from," she'd say, but when she was asked to sign a letter of protest condemning how the book had distorted the facts, she refused. From that point on, starting 1992, they weren't yet talking about divorce, but they were discussing a separation, meaning Charles and Diana would live apart, but they would still officially be husband and wife and still carry out their royal duties as Prince and Princess of Wales. They even continued going on trips together, and once again the journalists wrote, "Oh, they reconciled and they look wonderful together," but behind the scenes it was still tears and fights just like before. They were in Paris, and journalists enthusiastically described their romantic candlelit boat ride on the Seine. It was like all the cracks had healed. Peace and love were back, but in reality, they spent the evening on the boat without looking at each other, even once, without saying a single word. Of course, they had their ups and downs, but overall, it was all very difficult. And about 2 years passed. In 1994, Charles gave a televised interview, watched by millions of people. In it, he spoke very honestly about how he had tried to save the marriage and how hard it had been. At the same time, he spoke very tactfully and respectfully about Diana. He made a strong impression. His popularity immediately rose, and more people started saying he was worthy of becoming king. Then, in that interview, he was asked, "Did you cheat on your wife?" And he said, "I didn't cheat on her while there was still hope to save the marriage, but afterwards, yes, I did."
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife?
Until it became irretrievably broken down. Us both having tried.
He didn't mention Camilla by name, but it was obvious that he was talking about her. Diana knew. Of course, she had been told in advance what day the interview would air. On that very day, she was attending yet another charity event. There are famous photos of Diana in a stunning, short, black dress. Journalists immediately dubbed it none other than the revenge dress. So she shows up that evening, the very evening Charles's interview and broadcast, in a glamorous dress, looking gorgeous, cheerful, supposedly confident and carefree. She spends the evening putting on a show that she doesn't care. But in reality, she cared very much. She was feeling worse and worse. That same year, 1994, she suffered another devastating blow when a book was published by a woman named Anna Pasternak, a niece of Boris Pasternak, actually, which didn't do anything to help her writing style. The book was written in an unbelievably trashy, flowery tone, like a romance novel, and it was titled Princess in Love. The book was based on the revelations of James Hewitt, the man who had a 5-year affair with Diana. For a large sum of money, he told everything: how they met, where, when, how they made love, with all kinds of details. Afterwards, there wasn't a single journalist who didn't take a swing at him, and he was called every horrible name imaginable, and he was completely disgraced. But he received a huge amount of money, and Diana, once she found out that such a publication was being prepared, tried to stop it. She called him and he told her, "I no longer consider myself your friend." Maybe one could understand him too, although Diana's story had many unpleasant and messy episodes. James Hewitt probably did the most disgraceful thing of all, betraying her in a truly awful way. But the fight didn't stop there. The following year, in 1995, Diana gave an interview for the program Panorama to a journalist named Martin Bashir. That too is a very strange story, because as it later came to light, although Bashir completely denied it, he had gone to Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, and showed him, and later Diana as well, some documents that suggested she was being watched by some people. He didn't name names, but it was implied that some people close to her were spying on her, leaking information both to Buckingham Palace and to journalists. Diana, of course, concluded that some compromising information about her was about to be leaked, and there would be soon some publications and interviews in favor of Charles. So she rushed to speak her truth. Later, it turned out, well, Bashir became incredibly famous afterward, but he was also heavily criticized. Not only for his interview with Diana, he defended himself, claiming he had never shown any such documents, so that whole situation was also messy and unclear, but she agreed to the interview. She was eager to deliver another blow. Again, everything happened in secret. She sent all the palace staff away. When the film crew arrived, she opened the door to Kensington Palace herself. They came in, set up the equipment, and interviewed her for several hours. From that, a 55-minute interview was produced, in which she once again spoke in detail about what a scoundrel Charles was. She also answered questions about James Hewitt and said that she adored him.
Were you unfaithful?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him.
She spoke very openly about many other things as well, accusing Buckingham Palace of spying on her and trying to destroy her. One of Charles's friends later said that this was a sign of Diana's paranoia. He eventually apologized for that. Both Diana's friends and Charles's friends were deeply shocked by the interview.
It really is the sort of advanced stages of paranoia.
So she's made it all up. She's paranoid.
I've simply no idea, but it seems to me like the advanced stages of paranoia.
But the public was thrilled. Of course, ratings were being tracked the whole time. And of course, millions of people watched the interview, and the majority of the watchers said they were on Diana's side. After that interview, it became clear that even the facade could no longer be maintained. It was impossible. The Queen then wrote a letter to both Charles and Diana saying they must divorce and do so as soon as possible. It was, of course, an incredible shock. You can feel sorry for everyone involved in this story, but by then, nothing could be changed anymore.